The morning sun cast long golden shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Princess Charlotte stood near the ancient oak tree that had witnessed centuries of royal history. She was only 9 years old, but there was something about her posture that spoke of a maturity far beyond her years. Her small hands clutched a worn leather journal, the same one her late great-grandmother had given her just months before passing away. Inside those pages were sketches of flowers, notes about royal duties, and private thoughts that belonged only to her. Charlotte had always been a thoughtful child. Her parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, often remarked how she seemed to carry the weight of understanding on her small shoulders. She knew things without being told. She felt the shifting moods in palace corridors like changes in weather. And, on this particular morning, she sensed that something was different. Something was wrong. The previous evening had been filled with unusual tension. There had been a family gathering, one of those formal yet supposedly intimate dinners that brought together different branches of the royal family. Charlotte had sat quietly, eating her roast vegetables and watching the adults with careful eyes. She noticed how her father's jaw tightened when certain topics arose. She saw how her mother's smile became fixed and practiced when Camilla, the queen consort, entered the room. Charlotte did not understand all the history that swirled between these people she loved. She was too young to comprehend the complicated past, the pain her grandmother Diana had endured, or the way wounds could linger across decades. But she felt it. Children always feel these things, even when they cannot name them. The dinner had ended with polite goodbyes and air kisses that meant nothing. Charlotte had been shuffled off to bed by her nanny, but sleep had not come easily. She had lain awake listening to the ancient house settling around her, thinking about the way Camilla had looked at her during dessert. There had been something in those eyes, something cold. Now, in the morning light, Charlotte had escaped to her favorite spot in the garden. The oak tree was massive, its trunk wider than her arms could reach if she tried to hug it. Her great-grandmother had once told her that this tree had been planted during the reign of Queen Victoria. Charlotte liked to imagine all the royal children who had played beneath its branches over the years. She wondered if any of them had felt the way she felt now. Lost in thought, she did not immediately notice the approaching footsteps on the gravel path. When she looked up, her heart gave a small, uncomfortable jump. Queen Camilla was walking toward her, alone, without her usual entourage of ladies-in-waiting or assistants. This was unusual. Camilla rarely sought out the children without a camera crew nearby or a planned event to justify the interaction. Charlotte stood up straight, remembering her training. She had been taught to curtsy to the queen consort, to show respect, to be polite regardless of her private feelings. She began the gesture, bending her knees and lowering her head slightly. But Camilla raised her hand, stopping the child mid-motion. Her face was not smiling. The pleasant mask she wore for public appearances was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was an expression Charlotte had never witnessed before. It was tight, controlled, but beneath that control was something that looked almost like anger. The young princess felt her stomach tighten. She had done nothing wrong. She had been well-behaved at dinner. She had said please and thank you. She had not interrupted the adults or complained about the boring conversation. So why was Camilla looking at her like this? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The birds sang in the trees overhead, oblivious to the tension building between the elderly woman and the young girl. A gardener worked somewhere in the distance, the sound of his shears providing a rhythmic backdrop to the silence. Finally, Camilla spoke. Her voice was low, barely above a whisper, but each word struck Charlotte like a physical blow. The words that came from the queen consort's mouth were not meant for a child to hear. They were words born from years of insecurity, from the knowledge that no matter how many crowns she wore or titles she held, there would always be those who questioned her place in the royal family. They were words that revealed the deep-seated fear that the Spencer blood, Diana's legacy, would always overshadow her own. Charlotte did not fully understand everything Camilla said, but she understood the tone. She understood the cruelty beneath the careful pronunciation. And, She understood that this woman, who was supposed to be family, did not love her. Perhaps did not even like her. The young princess felt tears prick at her eyes, but she fought them back with all the strength she possessed. She had been taught that royals do not cry in public. She had been taught to maintain composure, to present a calm face to the world regardless of internal storms. But she was only 9, and the hurt was overwhelming. What neither Camilla nor Charlotte realized was that they were not entirely alone. Standing at a discreet distance, partially hidden by a hedge of roses, was a member of the Royal Protection Command. His name was Thomas Whitmore, and he had served the royal family for 23 years. He had seen things during his career that would never appear in any newspaper or history book. He had kept secrets that would die with him. But what he witnessed that morning in the garden shook him in a way few things ever had. Thomas was not supposed to intervene in family matters. His job was protection from external threats, not mediation of internal conflicts. He was supposed to be invisible, a silent guardian who observed without participating. But as he watched the queen consort berate a child, something inside him shifted. He had known Princess Diana. He had been a young officer when she was alive, and he remembered her kindness, the way she spoke to staff as equals, the genuine warmth in her smile. He saw that same warmth in Charlotte. He saw Diana's eyes looking out from the child's face, and he could not stand by and do nothing. Moving forward, Thomas made his presence known. He did not rush or create a scene. He simply stepped onto the gravel path and walked toward the 2 figures beneath the oak tree. His footsteps were measured, purposeful, impossible to ignore. Camilla looked up, startled. She had not expected anyone to witness this private conversation. Her expression flickered through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, annoyance, and then, as she recognized who was approaching, something that might have been fear. Thomas stopped at a respectful distance. He looked at the queen consort with steady eyes that held no judgment yet missed nothing. Then he looked at Charlotte, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice was calm and professional. But the words he chose were anything but ordinary. Those 9 words would later echo through palace corridors, whispered by staff who heard about the incident through the invisible network that connects all those who serve the royal family. Those 9 words would reach the ears of the king himself. Those 9 words would change the dynamics of relationships that had been building for years. But in that moment, Charlotte only knew that someone had come to her defense. Someone had seen what was happening and had chosen not to look away. She felt a rush of gratitude so intense that it nearly broke through her careful composure. Camilla's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in many years, she found herself without words. The queen consort was not accustomed to being challenged, even in such a subtle way. She was not accustomed to having witnesses to her private moments. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Her steps were quick, almost hurried, lacking the usual measured grace she displayed in public. Charlotte watched her go, not moving from her spot beneath the ancient oak. Thomas Whitmore remained where he was until the queen consort had disappeared from view. Only then did he approach the young princess. He knelt down so that he was at her eye level, something most adults never did. They spoke down to her literally and figuratively. But this man understood that children deserved to be met where they stood. Charlotte looked into his face and saw kindness there. She saw understanding. She saw something that told her she was safe. The guard did not ask her what had happened. He did not press for details or explanations. He simply told her that she was brave, that she was valued, and that she should always remember her worth regardless of what anyone else might say. These were not the words of a bodyguard speaking to a future queen. These were the words of one human being offering comfort to another. Charlotte nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The tears she had been holding back were still threatening to fall, and she knew that if she opened her mouth, they would come flooding out. Thomas stood up and resumed his proper position at a distance. But before he withdrew completely, he gave Charlotte a small nod. It was a gesture of solidarity, a promise that he would remember what he had seen and heard. It was a gift of validation that the young princess would carry with her for years to come. Left alone once more beneath the oak tree, Charlotte finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. She sat down on the soft grass and leaned her back against the ancient trunk. The bark was rough through her thin dress, but she found the texture grounding. It reminded her that the world was still solid, still real, even when everything else felt uncertain. She opened her journal and looked at the pages filled with her great-grandmother's handwriting. Queen Elizabeth had given her advice in this book, wisdom passed down from one generation to the next. Charlotte traced her fingers over the familiar words, drawing strength from the connection to someone who had loved her unconditionally. Her great-grandmother had once written that being royal meant carrying burdens that others could not see. It meant smiling when you wanted to cry, standing tall when you wanted to crumble, and finding grace in moments of pain. Charlotte had always thought she understood these words. Now, sitting in the garden after her encounter with Camilla, she understood them in a way she never had before. The morning continued around her, indifferent to her private struggle. Clouds drifted across the sky. A squirrel ran along a nearby branch. The gardener finished his work and moved on to another section of the grounds. Life went on as it always did, as it always would, regardless of the dramas that unfolded within palace walls. Eventually, Charlotte's mother found her there. The Princess of Wales had sensed that something was wrong with her daughter. She had that gift, the ability to feel when her children needed her. She had searched the castle and the grounds until she spotted the small figure beneath the oak tree. Catherine approached slowly, giving Charlotte time to compose herself if needed. She sat down on the grass beside her daughter, not caring that her elegant dress would become stained with green. Some things were more important than appearances. Mother and daughter sat together in silence for a long time. Catherine did not push for explanations. She simply offered her presence, her warmth, her unconditional love. She wrapped an arm around Charlotte's shoulders and pulled her close. Charlotte leaned into her mother's embrace, finally, feeling safe enough to let down her guard. The tears came then, silent and streaming down her cheeks. She cried for reasons she could not fully articulate, for hurts both specific and general, for the unfairness of a world that expected so much from someone so young. Catherine held her daughter and made soothing sounds, the universal language of maternal comfort. She did not know exactly what had happened, but she knew that something had wounded her child, and she made a silent vow to discover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. The bond between mother and daughter deepened in that moment beneath the oak tree. It was forged in shared vulnerability, in the understanding that they faced challenges together that few others could comprehend. They were not just princess and future princess. They were family connected by love that transcended titles and expectations. When Charlotte's tears finally subsided, she looked up at her mother with red-rimmed eyes. She wanted to tell her everything, to pour out the story of what Camilla had said and done. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the royal training that encouraged discretion. Perhaps it was a desire to protect her mother from additional stress. Or perhaps it was simply the exhaustion that follows emotional release. Instead, she asked her mother if they could stay there a little longer, beneath the tree that had stood for centuries, watching over generations of royal children. Catherine agreed without hesitation. They stayed there together as the morning aged into afternoon, finding peace in each other's company. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the castle, Thomas Whitmore was completing his shift. He handed over his duties to his replacement with the usual professionalism, giving no indication that anything unusual had occurred. But before he left the grounds, he made one stop. Thomas went to the office of the head of royal protection, a man he had known and respected for many years. He requested a private meeting, something that was unusual for someone of his position. The head agreed, curious about what could be so important. Behind closed doors, Thomas recounted what he had witnessed in the garden. He did not embellish or dramatize. He simply stated the facts as he had observed them, including the 9 words he had spoken to the queen consort. The head of royal protection listened without interruption. His face remained impassive, but his eyes revealed the gravity with which he received this information. When Thomas finished speaking, there was a long pause. Finally, the head asked Thomas if he understood the implications of what he had done. Speaking to a member of the senior royal family in such a manner could be considered overstepping his bounds, could result in disciplinary action, even termination. Thomas met his superior's gaze steadily. He said that he understood the risks. He said that he was prepared to face the consequences of his actions. But he also said that he would make the same choice again if faced with the same situation. Some things he believed were more important than protocol. The head of royal protection nodded slowly. He told Thomas to go home, to say nothing to anyone else, and to wait for further instructions. The matter would be handled at higher levels. What those higher levels would decide remained to be seen. Thomas accepted this response and left the office. He went home to his small apartment on the outskirts of London, where he lived alone since his divorce 3 years earlier. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city go about its business. He did not regret what he had done. He knew that he had been right to intervene, even if it cost him his career. Some lines should not be crossed, and what Camilla had done to Charlotte was one of them. A child should be protected from cruelty, regardless of who delivers that cruelty or what crown they wear. As the sun began to set on that momentous day, the various players in this unfolding drama retreated to their separate spaces. Charlotte eventually returned to the castle with her mother, where she was tucked into bed early with promises of better days ahead. Catherine sought out her husband, her mind racing with questions and concerns. Camilla withdrew to her private rooms, her face revealing nothing of the turmoil that surely churned within. And the 9 words spoken by a loyal guard continued to ripple outward, touching lives and shifting relationships in ways that none of them could yet imagine. The full consequences of that morning would take time to reveal themselves. But the seed had been planted, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. In her bedroom, Charlotte lay awake in the darkness, thinking about everything that had happened. She thought about Camilla's harsh words and cold eyes. She thought about Thomas Whitmore's kindness and courage. She thought about her mother's comforting embrace and her great-grandmother's wise words in the journal. She was young, but she was learning. She was learning that the world contained both cruelty and kindness, sometimes in equal measure. She was learning that the people who were supposed to love you could sometimes hurt you the most. And she was learning that unexpected allies could appear in unexpected places. Most importantly, she was learning about her own strength. She had faced something difficult today, and she had survived. She had not crumbled or broken. She had maintained her composure in the moment, and she had allowed herself to feel her emotions afterward in a safe space. These were skills that would serve her well in the years to come. Outside her window, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They were the same stars that had shone over Windsor Castle for centuries, indifferent witnesses to countless royal dramas. Charlotte found comfort in their constancy. Whatever happened tomorrow or the day after, the stars would still be there. And so would she. With that thought, she finally drifted off to sleep, clutching her journal to her chest like a talisman. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new revelations. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of her room, she was safe. She was loved, and she was stronger than she knew. The first chapter of this story had been written. Many more would follow, each building on what had come before, each leading toward a resolution that none of them could yet foresee. The palace was stunned, the family was shaken, and the future was uncertain. But through it all, a young princess was finding her voice, and that voice would prove to be more powerful than anyone expected. The morning after the incident brought no relief to anyone within the castle walls. The sun rose as it always did, painting the ancient stones in shades of gold and amber. But beneath that beautiful exterior, tension crackled like static electricity before a storm. Word had begun to spread through the invisible network of palace staff, passing from ear to ear in hushed whispers that stopped abruptly whenever a member of the royal family appeared. Catherine had spent a restless night, her mind turning over the image of her daughter's tear-stained face again and again. She had tried to coax the full story from Charlotte, but the child had been reluctant to speak. There was something both admirable and heartbreaking about her daughter's discretion. At 9 years old, Charlotte had already internalized the royal code of silence, the understanding that some things should not be spoken aloud even within the family. But Catherine was not willing to let this go. She had seen the look in Charlotte's eyes, the mixture of hurt and confusion that no mother could ignore. Whatever had happened in that garden, it had wounded her child deeply, and Catherine intended to find out exactly what had caused that wound. She began her investigation quietly, as befitting a royal. She spoke to staff members she trusted, asking careful questions without revealing too much about what she suspected. Most knew nothing useful, but a few exchanged glances that told her she was on the right track. Something had happened, something significant, and it involved Camilla. The Princess of Wales had always maintained a careful relationship with her husband's stepmother. She was polite, respectful, mindful of the hierarchy and the history that surrounded them all. But she had never forgotten who Camilla was or what she represented. She had not forgotten the pain that William had carried since childhood, the loss of his mother, the complicated feelings he held toward the woman who had played such a controversial role in his parents' marriage. Catherine had chosen to put these feelings aside for the sake of family harmony. She had smiled for photographs and attended events together with Camilla. She had taught her children to show proper respect to the queen consort. But beneath that dutiful exterior, she had always been watching, always been waiting to see if her instincts about Camilla were correct. Now, it seemed those instincts had been validated in the worst possible way. By mid-morning, Catherine had pieced together enough information to understand the general shape of what had occurred. She knew that Camilla had approached Charlotte alone in the garden. She knew that words had been exchanged, words that had upset her daughter greatly, and she knew that a protection officer named Thomas Whitmore had somehow been involved. She requested to speak with Thomas directly, but was told that he was currently on administrative leave pending review of an incident. This information made her blood run cold. If Thomas had done something to merit administrative leave, it must have been significant. And if his actions had anything to do with defending Charlotte, then he was being punished for protecting her daughter. Catherine felt a fire ignite within her chest. She was generally a calm person, measured and diplomatic in all her dealings. But when it came to her children, she possessed a fierce protective instinct that could match any creature in nature. She would not allow someone who had helped Charlotte to suffer consequences while the person who had hurt her went unpunished. She went to find her husband. William was in his private study, attempting to focus on correspondence that required his attention. But his concentration had been broken from the moment he awakened. He had sensed the disturbance in the castle atmosphere. He had noticed the way staff avoided meeting his eyes. He had felt the weight of something unspoken hanging over the morning. When Catherine entered, he looked up with relief. Whatever was happening, they would face it together. That was how their partnership worked, how it had always worked since the day they married. Catherine closed the door behind her and stood for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then, she told her husband everything she had learned. She spoke calmly and clearly, presenting the facts without emotional embellishment. But beneath her composed exterior, William could see the fury building. As he listened, William felt his own emotions begin to stir. He had spent years trying to find peace with his father's marriage to Camilla. He had put aside his childhood resentments for the sake of his relationship with his father and for the public image of a united royal family. He had defended Camilla against critics who still blamed her for his mother's unhappiness. But this was different. This was not about old history or adult politics. This was about his daughter, his Charlotte, the child who had inherited so much of her grandmother Diana's spirit and grace. The thought of Camilla hurting Charlotte, of saying cruel things to a 9-year-old girl, filled William with a cold rage that he struggled to contain. He stood up from his desk and began to pace the room. His mind raced through possibilities and implications. This could not be swept under the carpet. It could not be handled with polite deflections and strategic silences. Something had to be done, something that would protect his children and make clear that such behavior would not be tolerated. But he also knew the complications involved. Camilla was the queen consort, his father's wife, technically his stepmother. Any confrontation would have repercussions that extended far beyond their immediate family. The press would eventually catch wind of any discord. The institution of the monarchy itself could be affected. Catherine watched her husband wrestle with these competing concerns. She understood the position he was in better than anyone. She had watched him navigate impossible situations throughout their marriage, always trying to balance personal feelings against public duty. But she also knew that some things transcended political calculation. She approached him and placed a hand on his arm, stopping his pacing. She looked into his eyes and spoke quietly but firmly. She told him that Charlotte needed to know her parents would protect her. She told him that allowing this to pass without consequence would send a message that cruelty was acceptable if delivered by someone important enough. She told him that his daughter's well-being had to come before institutional considerations. William listened to his wife and felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. She was right. Of course she was right. Charlotte came first. His children always came first. Everything else, the politics, the public image, the complicated family dynamics, all of it was secondary to the sacred duty of protecting his children. He made a decision then. He would speak to his father. He would tell the king exactly what had happened and demand that something be done. He would not allow Camilla's position to shield her from accountability. If that created problems within the family, so be it. Some problems needed to be created in order to solve bigger ones. But before he could act on this decision, there was a knock at the study door. A staff member informed them that the king wished to see them both immediately. It seemed word had traveled faster than anyone anticipated. William and Catherine exchanged a glance that contained 1,000 unspoken words. They adjusted their appearances, putting on the composed masks that royalty required. Then they walked together through the castle corridors toward the king's private chambers. The walk seemed to take forever, each step carrying them closer to a confrontation that none of them had sought but all of them had known was coming. Portraits of ancestors watched them pass, silent witnesses to yet another chapter in the ongoing drama of the royal family. When they arrived, they were admitted immediately. King Charles was seated in his favorite chair, looking older than William had ever seen him look. The weight of the situation had already begun to take its toll. Beside him stood Camilla, her face a careful blank that revealed nothing of what she might be feeling. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. William felt his hands clench into fists at his sides as he looked at his stepmother. All the careful diplomacy of the past years evaporated in an instant. He saw before him not the queen consort, not his father's wife, but the woman who had hurt his daughter. Charles spoke first, his voice weary but firm. He had been informed of the incident in the garden. He had heard Thomas Whitmore's account through official channels. He understood that a situation had developed that required addressing. William waited to hear what his father would say next. Would Charles defend his wife? Would he minimize what had happened? Would he ask his son to overlook the transgression for the sake of family peace? What came instead surprised everyone in the room. Charles turned to look at Camilla with an expression that contained both disappointment and something harder to define. He asked her directly if what he had been told was accurate. Had she approached Charlotte alone in the garden? Had she spoken harsh words to the child? Camilla's composure flickered for just a moment. A shadow of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps defiance, crossed her features. Then she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. She did not deny what had happened. Instead, she began to explain. She spoke of pressures that no one else understood. She spoke of years of being treated as an outsider, of being compared unfavorably to a ghost, of having her legitimacy questioned at every turn. She spoke of seeing Diana's influence continue through Charlotte, that unmistakable Spencer quality that seemed to mock everything Camilla had tried to build. As she spoke, William felt his anger transform into something colder and more permanent. He was hearing, perhaps for the first time, the full extent of Camilla's resentment toward his mother's memory. He was understanding that beneath the polished exterior she presented to the world, there had always been this darkness, this bitter envy that had now spilled out onto an innocent child. Catherine listened to Camilla's words with growing disbelief. She had known that complex emotions surrounded the Diana situation. She had known that Camilla's position in the family was not entirely secure despite the official titles and public acceptance. But she had never imagined that these feelings would manifest in cruelty toward Charlotte. She thought of her daughter, alone in that garden, facing this woman's anger without understanding why it was directed at her. Charlotte had done nothing wrong. Charlotte was just a child, a little girl who had the misfortune of resembling a grandmother she had never known. And, for that, she had been punished. The Princess of Wales felt something shift within her. The careful diplomacy she had maintained for years, the willing suspension of judgment she had practiced for the sake of family harmony, all of it crumbled away. What remained was a mother's righteous fury and a determination that this would never happen again. She spoke then, interrupting Camilla's justifications. Her voice was calm but carried an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. She told Camilla that whatever feelings she had about Diana, whatever insecurities she harbored about her own position, none of it gave her the right to harm a child. She told her that Charlotte was innocent of the sins Camilla attributed to her, innocent of the history she could not change, innocent of the resemblance she could not help. Catherine continued, her words measured but devastating. She said that a true queen, a truly regal woman, would rise above petty jealousies and treat all children in the family with love and kindness. She said that what Camilla had done revealed a smallness of character that no crown could disguise. The room fell silent after Catherine finished speaking. Charles looked at his daughter-in-law with something like respect, perhaps even admiration. He had rarely heard anyone speak to Camilla so directly, with such controlled passion. He had rarely seen anyone hold the queen consort accountable in such clear terms. Camilla's face had gone white. She was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone who was technically her junior in the royal hierarchy. She looked to Charles for support, for defense, but found neither. William stepped forward then, adding his voice to his wife's. He told his father that he loved him, that he had tried to accept Camilla for his sake, that he had put aside his own complicated feelings about the past. But he also told him that Charlotte had to come first. His daughter had to be protected, even if that protection created discomfort for others. He told his father that he wanted assurances. He wanted to know that Camilla would never be alone with his children again. He wanted to know that steps would be taken to ensure their safety and emotional well-being. He wanted to know that his father understood the gravity of what had happened. Charles listened to his son's demands with a heavy heart. He was caught between the wife he had waited decades to marry and the family he had pledged to protect. He was caught between the woman he loved and the grandchildren who carried his legacy forward. These were impossible choices, the kind that could tear a person apart. But as he looked at William's face, Charles saw something that settled the matter. He saw his son's pain, yes, but he also saw strength and conviction. He saw a father willing to fight for his children regardless of the consequences. He saw, perhaps, a glimpse of the King William would one day become. Charles nodded slowly. He told William that he understood. He told him that Charlotte's safety was paramount. He told him that measures would be put in place to ensure nothing like this ever happened again. Then, he turned to Camilla with an expression that mixed sorrow with resolution. He told her that she had made a serious mistake. He told her that her feelings, however valid they might seem to her, did not excuse causing pain to a child. He told her that she would need to find a way to make amends, not just to Charlotte but to the entire family. Camilla stood frozen, processing this unexpected development. She had not anticipated that Charles would fail to defend her. She had not expected to find herself isolated, confronted by both her stepson and his wife while her husband looked on with disappointment. For the first time in many years, she found herself without allies in the room. The carefully constructed position she had built over decades suddenly felt precarious. The acceptance she thought she had earned now seemed conditional, dependent on behavior she had failed to maintain. She tried to speak, to offer some defense or explanation, but the words would not come. What could she say that would undo what she had done? What justification could possibly excuse the cruelty she had shown to a 9-year-old girl? The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Camilla did the only thing left for her to do. She inclined her head in acknowledgement of what had been said. She murmured something that might have been an apology, though it lacked the conviction that a true apology required. Then, she turned and left the room, her steps quick and her face carefully averted. After she had gone, the tension in the room shifted but did not fully dissipate. Charles sank back in his chair, looking exhausted. The confrontation had taken something out of him, had forced him to confront truths he had perhaps been avoiding for years. William approached his father and sat down nearby. He reached out and took the older man's hand, a gesture of connection that transcended the conflict they had just navigated. He told his father that he did not want this to damage their relationship. He told him that he still loved him, still respected him, still wanted to maintain their bond. Charles looked at his son with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. He told William that he was proud of him, proud of the father he had become, proud of the way he protected his family. He said that whatever complications arose from this day, they would face them together. Catherine watched this moment between father and son with a mixture of emotions. She was relieved that the confrontation had gone better than she feared. She was proud of William for standing firm. She was grateful to Charles for ultimately choosing to support his grandchildren over his wife's feelings. But she also knew that this was not the end of the story. Camilla had been chastened but not transformed. The resentments she harbored would not disappear simply because she had been called out on them. The danger to Charlotte and the other children might be reduced, but it was not eliminated. There was still work to be done, boundaries to be established, healing to be accomplished. And there was still the matter of Thomas Whitmore, the guard who had intervened and was now facing consequences for his courage. Catherine mentioned this to the men, reminding them that a loyal servant was being punished for protecting Charlotte. She asked that something be done to reverse this injustice, to recognize Thomas's bravery rather than penalize it. Charles agreed immediately. He would personally intervene in the administrative matter. He would ensure that Thomas Whitmore not only retained his position but received recognition for his actions. A man who would risk his career to protect a child deserved better than bureaucratic punishment. William felt a measure of relief at this decision. He had been troubled by the thought of Thomas suffering for doing the right thing. The guard had shown more moral courage in that moment than many people showed in a lifetime. He deserved to be honored, not disciplined. As the conversation wound down, William and Catherine prepared to leave the king's chambers. But before they went, Charles asked them to send Charlotte to him later in the day. He wanted to speak with his granddaughter himself, to apologize on behalf of the family, to reassure her that she was loved and protected. William agreed to this request, touched that his father wanted to personally address Charlotte's pain. Perhaps some good could come from this terrible situation after all. Perhaps the crisis could lead to stronger bonds and clearer understanding. The Prince and Princess of Wales walked back through the castle corridors, their hands intertwined, their hearts heavy but hopeful. They had faced a challenge and had emerged stronger for it. They had stood together in defense of their daughter and they had been heard. But the day was not over yet. Charlotte still needed to be told that her parents knew what had happened. She still needed to be reassured that she had done nothing wrong. She still needed to understand that she was valued and loved beyond measure. They found their daughter in the playroom with her brothers, engaged in a game of imagination that had transformed the space into a magical kingdom. George was playing the role of a wise wizard, while Louis was apparently a dragon who occasionally needed to be reminded not to actually bite his siblings. Charlotte looked up when her parents entered, and something in their expressions made her pause. She could see that they knew. She could see that conversations had been had, decisions had been made. She braced herself for what might come next. Catherine knelt down to Charlotte's level, just as Thomas Whitmore had done in the garden. She looked into her daughter's eyes and told her that she knew what had happened with Camilla. She told her that she was sorry Charlotte had been hurt. She told her that it was not her fault, that nothing she had done had caused or deserved what happened. Charlotte listened with the serious attention she gave to all important matters. She asked her mother if she was in trouble, if she had done something wrong by not speaking up sooner. The question broke Catherine's heart even as it made her proud of her daughter's conscientiousness. She assured Charlotte that she was not in trouble at all. She told her that she had handled a difficult situation with remarkable grace. She told her that the adults in her life would make sure she was safe from now on. William joined them on the floor, forming a family circle that included George and Louis, even though the younger boys did not fully understand what was happening. He told all his children that they were the most important things in his life. He told them that he would always protect them, always fight for them, always put them first. Charlotte leaned into her father's embrace, finally, allowing herself to feel the security she needed. She was safe. She was believed. She was loved. Nothing else mattered as much as that. The family stayed there together for a long time, the tensions and confrontations of the morning fading into the background as they focused on what truly mattered. Love, connection, the unbreakable bonds that united them. Outside the playroom windows, the afternoon sun continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath it. The castle went about its business, staff performing their duties, visitors touring the public areas, life continuing as it always did. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of the royal family. Lines had been drawn, truths had been spoken, and a young princess had discovered that she was not alone, that there were people who would stand up for her, who would face down power and position to ensure her well-being. These were lessons that would stay with Charlotte for the rest of her life. They would shape who she became, how she treated others, what kind of queen she might one day be. In the crucible of this painful experience, something precious was being forged. As evening approached, Charlotte was summoned to see her grandfather. She went to the king's chambers with some nervousness, unsure of what to expect. But what she found there was not intimidating at all. Charles was seated in a comfortable chair, and he had arranged for tea and her favorite biscuits to be brought in. He patted the seat beside him, inviting her to sit close. His manner was gentle, grandfatherly, completely different from the formality of official occasions. He told Charlotte that he had heard about what happened in the garden. He told her that he was very sorry, that what Camilla had done was wrong, that Charlotte had not deserved any of it. He told her that he loved her very much and was proud of the wonderful young lady she was becoming. Charlotte listened to her grandfather's words, feeling something loosen in her chest. She had been carrying tension without realizing it, fear that maybe she had somehow caused what happened, that maybe there was something wrong with her. Now that fear was being dispelled by the King of England telling her she was blameless and loved. Charles then did something unexpected. He told Charlotte about her grandmother Diana. He spoke of her kindness, her warmth, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. He said that he saw those same qualities in Charlotte, and that they were gifts to be treasured, not flaws to be ashamed of. He acknowledged that the situation with Diana had been complicated, that mistakes had been made, that pain had been caused. But he also said that none of that was Charlotte's burden to carry. She was her own person with her own path to walk. She should embrace all parts of her heritage with pride. Charlotte absorbed these words like water into dry earth. She had always been curious about the grandmother she had never known, the woman whose portrait hung in their home, whose legacy seemed to follow their family everywhere. Now her grandfather was giving her permission to claim that legacy, to see it as a gift rather than a complication. She asked him if he would tell her more stories about Diana sometime. Charles smiled and said he would be honored to do so. There was much she should know, much that he could share. But that would be for another day. For now, he simply wanted her to know that she was cherished. When Charlotte left her grandfather's chambers, she felt lighter than she had in days. The weight of the incident was still there, but it was no longer crushing her. She had been supported by the people who mattered most. She had been validated and protected. She made her way back to her room, passing through corridors she had walked countless times before. But everything seemed different now, seen through the lens of her new understanding. She was not just a princess going through the motions of royal life. She was Charlotte, beloved daughter and granddaughter, inheritor of a complex legacy, survivor of an ordeal that had tested her strength. In her room, she took out her journal again, the precious book from her great-grandmother. She found a blank page and began to write. She wrote about what had happened, about how she felt, about what she had learned. She wrote about Thomas Whitmore's kindness and her mother's fierce protection. She wrote about her grandfather's stories and his assurance of love. As she wrote, she felt the experience transform from a wound into a lesson. It was still painful, still something she would have preferred not to go through. But it had also given her something. It had shown her the truth about some people and the goodness in others. It had revealed the strength she possessed and the support available to her. She ended her journal entry with a thought that would guide her for years to come. She wrote that being royal meant facing difficult things with grace, but it also meant being human and feeling pain. The key was to let those experiences make you stronger and kinder, not harder and bitter. It was wisdom beyond her years, but then Charlotte had always been wise beyond her years. And now, shaped by this trial, she was becoming wiser still. The night fell over Windsor Castle, bringing with it the quiet that settles on all places when the bustle of day gives way to rest. In their separate rooms, the members of the royal family prepared for sleep, each carrying their own thoughts about the day's events. For Charlotte, sleep came more easily than it had the night before. She had been through something terrible, but she had also been through something transformative. She was not the same girl she had been before the garden. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood both the cruelty and the kindness the world could offer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new developments in this ongoing drama. But for tonight, she was at peace. She was loved. She was protected. And she was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the garden incident brought a strange new reality to Windsor Castle and the royal family. On the surface, public engagements continued as scheduled, photographs were taken, and the monarchy presented its familiar face to the world. But beneath that polished exterior, relationships had been fundamentally altered, and everyone was still adjusting to the new landscape. Thomas Whitmore had been reinstated to his position with full honors, just as the king had promised. More than that, he had received a personal commendation for his actions, a recognition that sent a clear message throughout the household staff. Those who protected the children would be supported, regardless of whom they might need to protect them from. Thomas himself found the attention uncomfortable. He was a private man who had never sought recognition or praise. He had done what he believed was right, and he would have made the same choice regardless of any reward or punishment. But he accepted the commendation gracefully, understanding that it meant something larger than his individual actions. It was a statement about values, about what the royal family deemed important. He was assigned to continue his duties in the Protection Command, but with a subtle change in his responsibilities. He now found himself frequently positioned where he could keep an eye on the Wales children during their activities around the grounds. It was not an official reassignment, but it was understood. William and Catherine had requested that Thomas be among those who watched over their family. Charlotte had asked to see Thomas again, to thank him properly for what he had done. Her parents arranged a brief meeting in the garden, near the same oak tree where the original incident had occurred. It was a thoughtful choice, a way of reclaiming that space and replacing the painful memory with something positive. When Charlotte approached Thomas, he bent down to her level as he had done before. She looked at him with those serious eyes that seemed to see so much, and she thanked him for being brave. She told him that what he had done meant everything to her, that knowing someone would stand up for her had helped her heal. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. In all his years of service, he had protected royalty from many threats. He had been trained to face dangers without flinching. But nothing had prepared him for the emotional impact of this small girl's gratitude. He told Charlotte that it had been his honor to help her, that she was brave too, braver than she knew. They talked for a few minutes more about ordinary things like Charlotte's favorite subjects in school and the name she had given to the squirrels that lived in the garden. It was a simple conversation, but it established a connection that would endure. Charlotte had found an unexpected ally, and Thomas had found a new sense of purpose in his duty. Meanwhile, Camilla had retreated into a kind of internal exile. She still appeared at required events, still performed her official functions, but she had become noticeably more subdued. The fire that had driven her outburst in the garden seemed to have burned itself out, leaving behind only ashes and regret. She had not apologized directly to Charlotte. Despite the confrontation with Charles and the demands made by William and Catherine, she had not found it within herself to speak words of remorse to the child she had hurt. Perhaps she could not admit, even to herself, how wrong she had been. Perhaps her pride would not allow such a vulnerable gesture. Or perhaps she simply did not know how to begin. This failure to apologize had not gone unnoticed. Catherine especially found it troubling. She believed that real healing required genuine acknowledgement of wrong, and without that acknowledgement, the wound would continue to fester beneath the surface. She had hoped that Camilla would find the grace to seek Charlotte's forgiveness. That hope was fading. Charles found himself in an impossible position, trapped between his wife's stubborn silence and his family's demand for accountability. He had spoken to Camilla privately on several occasions, encouraging her to make amends, to show the kind of character that a queen consort should embody. But Camilla had deflected each time, changing the subject or pleading exhaustion or simply leaving the room. He was beginning to see his wife in a different light. The woman he had loved for so long, the woman he had waited decades to marry, was revealing aspects of herself that troubled him deeply. Her inability to admit fault, her clinging to resentments that should have been released years ago, her apparent lack of remorse for hurting a child, all of these things accumulated like stones on a scale, slowly tipping his perception. Charles did not stop loving Camilla. Love, especially love that has endured for so many years, does not simply evaporate. But his love was now complicated by disappointment, by the recognition that the person he had idealized was flawed in ways he had not fully appreciated before. He found himself spending more time with his grandchildren, seeking in their innocent company a respite from the tensions of his marriage. Charlotte, especially, had become a source of joy and purpose for him. Her resilience in the face of what had happened inspired him. Her gentle spirit reminded him of all that was good in the world. He kept his promise to tell her stories about Diana. In quiet afternoon hours, they would sit together while he recounted memories from long ago. He told her about Diana's warmth with the public, the way she could make anyone feel seen and valued. He told her about Diana's sense of humor, her ability to find lightness even in difficult situations. He told her about the love Diana had for her sons, a love that had shaped William and Harry into the men they became. Charlotte absorbed these stories hungrily. She had always known she resembled her grandmother in appearance, but now she was learning about the person behind the photographs. She was discovering a kindred spirit, someone who had also been sensitive and caring and sometimes overwhelmed by the weight of royal expectations. She asked her grandfather why Diana had been so sad sometimes. It was a difficult question, one that touched on matters Charles was not sure how to explain to a 9-year-old. He told Charlotte that Diana had faced many challenges, that royal life could be very hard, and that sometimes people struggled under the pressure. He did not speak of his own role in Diana's unhappiness. That was a conversation for when Charlotte was older, if she wanted to have it. What he did tell her was that Diana had found joy in helping others, in using her position to make a difference in the world. He encouraged Charlotte to follow that example, to look for ways to use whatever influence she might have to do good. It was advice that planted seeds in the young princess's heart, seeds that would bloom into action in the years to come. While these private moments of healing occurred, the public aspects of royal life continued unabated. There were engagements to attend, charities to support, ceremonies to participate in. The Wales family presented a united front at each appearance, showing nothing of the turmoil that had rocked them. But the palace staff noticed changes. They observed that the Wales children were now kept at a careful distance from the Queen consort at public events. They saw that William and Catherine positioned themselves as buffers whenever Camilla was present. They witnessed the cool politeness that had replaced whatever warmth once existed between the households. Rumors began to circulate, as rumors always do in places where secrets are supposed to be kept. No one knew the full story, but everyone sensed that something significant had occurred. The incident in the garden had sent ripples outward that could be felt even by those who did not know its source. The media, always hungry for royal drama, began to pick up hints that all was not well within the family. Photographs were scrutinized for signs of tension. Body language was analyzed by experts who claimed to see evidence of rifts and resentments. Speculative articles appeared suggesting trouble in the relationship between the Wales family and the Queen consort. The palace press office worked overtime to manage these stories, issuing carefully worded statements that acknowledged nothing while attempting to reassure the public. It was a delicate dance, the same one the monarchy had performed for generations when internal problems threatened to become external scandals. William and Catherine watched this media attention with mixed feelings. On one hand, they wanted their family's privacy protected, especially Charlotte's. The last thing their daughter needed was to become the subject of tabloid speculation. On the other hand, part of them wanted the truth to be known, wanted the world to understand what Camilla had done and the kind of person she really was. They chose the path of discretion, as royals so often must. They did not give interviews or make statements. They did not confirm or deny the rumors. They simply went about their lives, focusing on their children and their duties, letting the media frenzy burn itself out. But privately, William was struggling. The confrontation with his father had opened old wounds that he thought had healed long ago. Being forced to defend his daughter against Camilla had brought back memories of being a child himself, caught in the crossfire of his parents' troubled marriage, watching his mother suffer while feeling powerless to help. He found himself thinking about Diana more than he had in years. He wondered what she would make of the current situation, how she would have handled it. He wondered if she would be proud of the way he had stood up for Charlotte, or if she would have counseled a different approach. Catherine noticed her husband's struggle and tried to support him through it. She listened when he needed to talk, gave him space when he needed solitude, and reminded him constantly that he was a good father doing the right thing. She was his anchor, as she had always been, steady and strong even when he felt adrift. She also made sure to care for herself during this difficult time. She took long walks in the gardens, finding peace in nature. She maintained her exercise routine, knowing that physical health supported mental health. She stayed connected with her own family, drawing strength from the stable, loving environment in which she had been raised. The Middletons had been informed of the general situation, though not all the details. Catherine's parents expressed their support and concern, offering to help in whatever way they could. They invited the Wales family to visit them in Berkshire, providing a refuge away from the palace tensions. These visits became an important part of the healing process. The children loved spending time with their other grandparents, with Carol and Michael, who doted on them without any of the complications that existed on the royal side. Charlotte especially seemed to bloom in the relaxed atmosphere, laughing and playing with a freedom that was sometimes constrained at Windsor. Watching her daughter at the Middleton home, Catherine reflected on how lucky they were to have this balance. Her children had access to both worlds, the formal grandeur of royal life and the comfortable warmth of an ordinary family. It gave them perspective, grounding, a sense of who they were beyond their titles. Back at Windsor, Charlotte had begun to process her experience in the way children do, through play and art and conversation with trusted adults. She drew pictures that her parents found both touching and concerning, images of gardens with dark corners and tall figures with angry faces, but also images of protective shields and warm sunshine breaking through clouds. Her therapist, a discreet professional who had worked with royal children before, helped her work through these feelings. The sessions were gentle and child-appropriate, using games and stories to explore what had happened and what it meant. Charlotte was making good progress, developing coping skills and building resilience. But scars do not disappear entirely, especially when the person who caused them remains present in one's life. Charlotte still had to see Camilla at family events. She still had to maintain the proper courtesies, to curtsy and address her correctly, to behave as royal protocol demanded. These interactions were carefully managed by her parents, but they still occurred. And each time Charlotte saw Camilla, she felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach, a memory of that morning in the garden. She was learning to manage this anxiety, to breathe through it and remind herself that she was safe. But it was a skill no 9-year-old should have to develop. George and Louis, Charlotte's brothers, had been affected by the situation as well, though in different ways. George, at 11, was old enough to understand that something serious had happened, but he had not been given details. He knew that his sister had been hurt somehow, that their parents were upset, that the atmosphere in the castle had changed. He responded by becoming more protective of Charlotte, keeping a watchful eye on her during family gatherings. Louis, only 5, understood even less. But he was sensitive to the emotional currents around him and had become more clingy with his parents, seeking reassurance through physical closeness. Catherine and William made sure to give him extra attention, extra cuddles, extra bedtime stories. They wanted him to feel secure even if he could not comprehend the source of the insecurity. The Wales family drew closer together through this trial. They developed new rituals, new ways of connecting and supporting each other. Sunday became a protected family day, free from engagements or obligations, dedicated entirely to being together. They played games, watched films, cooked meals together, and simply enjoyed each other's company. William discovered a talent for pancake making, producing increasingly elaborate shapes that delighted the children. Catherine organized craft projects that covered the playroom floor in glitter and glue. George taught Charlotte chess, and she proved to be a formidable opponent. Louis demanded to be included in everything, often with hilarious results. These moments of joy were precious, made more so by the contrast with the difficulties they had faced. The family was building memories that would last a lifetime, creating a foundation of love and connection that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the weeks turned into months, a new equilibrium began to establish itself. Camilla remained distant, William remained vigilant, Catherine remained strong. The children adapted to the new normal with the flexibility that youth allows. Life went on, as it always does, finding its way around obstacles like water flowing around stones. But beneath the surface stability, deeper questions remained unanswered. What did the future hold for Camilla's role in the family? How would this incident affect the succession and the relationships between generations? Could genuine reconciliation ever be achieved, or was the breach permanent? These questions occupied the minds of those involved, though they were not spoken aloud. They were the kind of questions that only time could answer, the kind that required patience and perspective to resolve. Charlotte, for her part, was focused on the present rather than the future. She had her studies, her friends, her hobbies, her family. She had her journal, filled with growing reflections and drawings. She had her daily life, which was gradually returning to something like normalcy. She still thought about what had happened in the garden. She still wondered why Camilla had been so cruel, what she had done to deserve that treatment. But she was learning not to blame herself for things that were not her fault. She was learning that other people's anger often had nothing to do with the person it was directed at. One afternoon, Sitting again beneath the ancient oak tree, Charlotte made a decision. She decided that she would not let what happened define her. She would not become bitter or fearful or closed off. She would stay open to love, open to connection, open to the goodness that existed alongside the cruelty in the world. It was a remarkable decision for a child to make, and one that spoke to the strength of her character. She had been given much, this young princess, but she had also been tested. And in that testing, she had discovered resources within herself that she had not known she possessed. She took out her journal and wrote about her decision, putting her commitment into words that she could return to if she ever wavered. She described the kind of person she wanted to be, the kind of queen she might someday become if that was her path. She wrote about kindness and courage and resilience, about choosing love over hate, about rising above those who would try to diminish her. When she finished writing, she read over what she had created. The words seemed almost too wise to have come from someone her age. But they had come from her, from the depth of experience she had gained through her ordeal. They were her words, her commitment, her promise to herself. She closed the journal and tucked it carefully into her pocket. Then, she looked up at the oak tree that had witnessed so much, the tree that had stood for more than a century, enduring storms and seasons and the passing of countless royal generations. She thought about all the children who had played beneath these branches before her. She thought about all those who might come after, future princes and princesses who did not yet exist. She was part of a chain that stretched back into history and forward into the unknown future, one link among many, but a link nonetheless. The responsibility of that position no longer felt like a burden. Felt like an opportunity. She could choose what kind of link she would be, what she would pass on to those who came after. She could choose to pass on bitterness and pain, or she could choose to pass on love and hope. Her choice was clear. It had been made in that moment of decision, confirmed with every word she wrote in her journal. She would be a link of love, of kindness, of strength. Whatever else might happen, whatever other trials might come, that would be her legacy. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, casting dancing patterns on the ground around her. Charlotte watched these patterns for a while, finding peace in their random beauty. Then, she stood up, brushed off her dress, and walked back toward the castle. There was homework to be done, lessons to prepare for, a family dinner to attend. Life continued with all its ordinary demands and small pleasures. The extraordinary events of recent weeks were becoming part of her history now, integrated into the fabric of who she was. She passed Thomas Whitmore on her walk back, standing at his post with quiet vigilance. They exchanged a small smile, a private acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Then, Charlotte continued on her way, secure in the knowledge that she was watched over, cared for, protected. The castle rose before her, ancient and imposing, filled with the weight of centuries. It was her home with all its complications and contradictions. She belonged here, belonged to this family and this legacy. And she was learning day by day how to carry that belonging with grace. As she entered through the garden door, she could hear the distant sounds of her brothers playing somewhere inside. She could smell something delicious coming from the kitchens, perhaps her favorite dinner being prepared. She could feel the familiar comfort of walls that had sheltered her since birth. Home, family, love. These were the foundations on which she stood, strong despite the cracks that had appeared. They would hold her, support her, guide her into whatever future awaited. And, somewhere in her pocket, her journal held the words of her commitment, a touchstone she could return to whenever she needed reminding. She was Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, Princess of Wales, and she was going to be just fine. A year had passed since the incident in the garden, and the seasons had cycled through their familiar patterns around Windsor Castle. Spring had given way to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, and now spring was returning once more. The daffodils were beginning to push through the soil, harbingers of warmth and renewal. Charlotte had celebrated her 10th birthday during this time, a milestone marked with both private family celebration and the usual public attention that accompanied royal occasions. She had grown taller, her face beginning to lose some of its childhood roundness as she approached adolescence. But her eyes remained the same, those thoughtful, observant eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. The year had brought changes beyond physical growth. Charlotte had developed new interests and deepened existing ones. She had become passionate about horses, spending hours at the stables, learning to ride with increasing confidence. She had discovered a love for photography, capturing images of the castle grounds, the gardens, the animals, and her family. She had continued her education, excelling in subjects that interested her and working diligently at those that did not. She had also continued to write in her journal, filling page after page with observations, reflections, and drawings. The journal had become more than a repository for her thoughts. It had become a practice of self-examination, a discipline that helped her process her experiences and understand her own mind. Looking back at earlier entries, she could see how far she had come. The raw pain of the garden incident had softened into something more like wisdom. She still remembered what had happened, still felt echoes of that hurt, but it no longer dominated her emotional landscape. It had become one part of her story, significant but not definitive. Thomas Whitmore had been promoted during the year, recognition of his years of service and his exemplary conduct. He now held a senior position in the Royal Protection Command, with broader responsibilities that took him beyond direct guard duty. But he made sure to maintain his connection with the Wales family, occasionally appearing at events where the children were present, offering a friendly nod or a brief conversation. Charlotte valued these encounters more than Thomas probably realized. He represented something important to her, proof that good people existed who would stand up for what was right even at personal cost. In a world that could sometimes seem full of compromise and calculation, his example shone brightly. The relationship between the Wales household and Camilla had settled into a kind of armed neutrality. They appeared together at required events, maintained public cordiality, and avoided private contact as much as possible. It was not ideal, but it was functional, a way of managing an impossible situation. Camilla herself had changed over the year, though not in the way many had hoped. She had not apologized to Charlotte, had not sought reconciliation, had not acknowledged the wrong she had done. Instead, she had retreated further into herself, becoming more guarded and distant, her public appearances marked by a new brittleness. The king had watched this transformation with sadness. He had hoped that the confrontation would spark reflection and growth, that Camilla would emerge from the crisis as a better person. Instead, she seemed to have hardened, to have built walls around herself that kept everyone out, including him. Their marriage had not ended, but it had changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Charles and Camilla no longer shared the easy intimacy they once had. Their conversations had become more formal, their time together more limited. They occupied the same spaces but seemed to exist in different worlds. Charles had responded by throwing himself into his work, into the causes he cared about, into his relationships with his grandchildren. He found purpose in these activities, meaning that sustained him through the difficult periods. But there were nights when he sat alone in his study, wondering how everything had come to this, mourning the vision of his later years that would never be realized. William and Catherine had navigated the year with their characteristic combination of determination and grace. They had protected their children while continuing to fulfill their public duties. They had managed their own emotions while supporting each other through difficult moments. They had shown what a strong partnership could accomplish, even in the face of family dysfunction. Their public standing had actually improved during this period, though they took no satisfaction in it. The media had continued to speculate about rifts with Camilla, and public sympathy had largely fallen on the side of the younger generation. People saw in William and Catherine a modern royal couple, devoted to their children, relatable in their struggles, admirable in their conduct. This public support was gratifying but also uncomfortable. They had not sought to win any popularity contest at Camilla's expense. They had simply tried to do right by their daughter. That their actions had been perceived positively by the public was almost incidental. George had grown during this year as well, becoming more aware of his future role and the responsibilities it would bring. He was 12 now, thoughtful and studious, already showing signs of the king he might someday become. He and Charlotte had grown closer through the family's trials, developing a sibling bond strengthened by shared experience. Louis, at 6, remained the joyful heart of the family, his enthusiastic energy a constant source of laughter and mild chaos. He was still too young to fully understand the dynamics swirling around him, but he was sensitive enough to feel them. He responded by being extra affectionate with everyone, as if his love could heal whatever hurt existed. The ancient oak tree in the garden continued to stand sentinel over these human dramas, as it had for more than a century. Charlotte still visited it regularly, sitting beneath its branches to think, to write, to simply be. It had become her special place, a sanctuary where she could process the complexities of her life. One afternoon in early spring, as she sat in her familiar spot, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small plaque had been affixed to the base of the tree, almost hidden by the grass. She bent down to read it and discovered that it had been placed there by Queen Victoria herself, commemorating the tree's planting in honor of a beloved grandchild who had died young. The discovery moved Charlotte deeply. Here was evidence that others before her had found meaning in this tree, had invested it with memory and emotion. The oak was not just a plant. It was a witness to generations of royal joys and sorrows, a living link to all who had come before. She traced the words on the plaque with her finger, feeling the grooves worn by more than a century of weather. She thought about the child for whom the tree had been planted, a great something of hers, dead so long ago that their name meant nothing to most people alive today. Yet here was this tree, still growing, still providing shade and shelter, still standing as a monument to a love that had outlasted the persons who felt it. It made her think about legacy in a new way, not as something grand or public, not as the accomplishments that would be recorded in history books, but as the quiet marks we leave on the world, the trees we plant, the kindnesses we show, the small acts of love that ripple outward long after we are gone. She decided to plant her own tree, not as a memorial for someone who had died, but as a celebration of someone who was living. She would plant it for herself, as a mark of her own resilience, as a symbol of the strength she had discovered through her trials. When she told her parents about this idea, they embraced it enthusiastically. Catherine helped her research what kind of tree would be appropriate considering the soil, the climate, and the aesthetic of the grounds. William arranged for a suitable spot to be prepared, near enough to the ancient oak that the two trees could be companions, far enough that neither would overshadow the other. They settled on a young English rowan, sometimes called a mountain ash. It was a tree with deep symbolic meaning in British folklore, associated with protection, healing, and the connection between the earthly and the divine. Its white spring flowers would turn to red berries in autumn, providing food for birds and beauty for human eyes. The planting ceremony was held on a mild spring day, attended only by immediate family. Charlotte dug the hole herself, with some help from her father when the soil proved stubborn. She placed the young tree in the ground, spread its roots carefully, and covered them with earth. She watered it with a small silver watering can that had belonged to her great-grandmother. As she stood back to admire her work, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the physical act of planting. She had made her mark on this place, added her own contribution to the landscape that had been shaped by generations before her. When she was old, she could return to this spot and see a mature tree that she had planted as a child. And, when she was gone, the tree would remain, a silent testament to her time on earth. Her family gathered around her, and William suggested that everyone say a few words about what the tree meant to them. Catherine spoke of growth and renewal. George spoke of strength and endurance. Louis, not quite understanding the solemnity of the moment, said he hoped the tree would be good for climbing. When it was Charlotte's turn, she stood quietly for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then, she spoke about resilience. She said that trees were remarkable because they adapted to whatever conditions they faced. They bent in storms instead of breaking. They grew around obstacles instead of being stopped by them. They could be scarred by lightning or stripped by harsh winters, and still they continued to grow. She said she wanted to be like a tree. She wanted to put down deep roots that would keep her grounded. She wanted to reach toward the light even when shadows fell around her. She wanted to provide shelter for others, just as others had provided shelter for her. Her family listened with tears in their eyes. Charlotte's words were simple, but they carried profound wisdom. They spoke to everything she had been.